Today I've got a really cool classic heavy metal style riff for you to learn, and it's in the key of A minor. Actually, you're gonna learn two classic heavy metal riffs within this song that we're about to go through. There's a third riff too, because there's this one part in the bridge where there's this little clean ambient breakdown. I'm gonna teach you how to play that as well. Now, a quick note about this particular song that you're about to learn. This is actually one of my own songs. It's called Out There. It's track number 5 on my first album, Apocalyptic Dreams. I've actually had a lot of you request that I do a lesson on this song, so here it is. Oh, and make sure you hang around for tone talk after the lesson. All right, let's jump right into this lesson. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break this down into the 3 sections that you're gonna learn. And I want you to hear the riffs in the full mix with all the instruments before we start breaking everything down. So here's what it sounds like in the full mix, just this first part here. All right, so that's the first part of the song. Now, that little riff that you heard, that's actually kind of like the main riff of the song itself. It's kind of like the chorus, if you will. So what I want to do is I want to just play that for you out here, just on its own, and then we'll break everything down note for note. So where I'm starting at here is we're playing the A minor on the D and the G string. So that's where we're at, and we're on frets number, of course, again, it's an A minor, but this frets 7 and 9 on the D and G strings. And, you know, we're moving those fingers around a little bit. We're not just playing the power chord and leaving it, right? We're kind of going back and forth between several notes here. And the frets that we're dealing with, I'll play this real slow, just this one little part, but the frets that we're going to be dealing with here, we're always going to make that constant. We're always going to keep that one note a constant, that 7th fret on the D string. But on the G string, we're going to be on frets 9, 10, and 7. So let me play that really slow for you. Now we're going to go into 2 more power chords after that, and there's going to be some movement involved. We're going from that A minor to an F and then a G, okay? But we're going to stay on those same strings, the D and G. So here's what that sounds like. Now what we're doing here is, as we're playing that F power chord, of course we're on frets 3 and 5, you notice we're also hitting that really cool sounding power chord in there as well, and that's frets 3 and 4. So we're kind of hitting those, we're kind of playing those a little bit together there, and then we slide up to the G power chord. We're on 5 and 7, but we're also playing 5 and 5 as well. So I'll play those 2 slow for you. Now we play that riff twice, but on the second time around I do something a little different, and that sounds like this. Now this can be a tricky little part here because we're getting that little squill out of that as well. And look, I'm going to be honest with you guys, sometimes I nail it, sometimes I don't. And you know, either way is okay. I actually like when it's a little different each time because it just adds more authenticity, if you know what I mean. But anyway, so that second time around, we're going to be on that G string 7th fret. That's that note that I'm getting that little squill on that. Okay, and I'll save that particular method for another lesson because, you know, that kind of goes deeper into the pick style and all that stuff. But anyway, so I'm getting at it. I'm doing a little bend with that as well. Ultimately, I'm going to land on the 5th fret of the D string. But I hit some notes in between that, which on the G string after that squill, so I'm going 7, 5, then the next string over, D string, 7, 5. But let me just be transparent with you guys. That little riff is done so quickly, sometimes I don't always hit those notes in between the starting note and the note that I land on. Sometimes I might muffle one, or sometimes I might hit one and not quite hit the other. Again, it's a quick little snappy riff that you do there, and I want to just kind of bring out that it's okay if it's not absolute every single time, because sometimes that's when some of the best riffs are written, when it's just like, okay, I played it and I pulled it off. I think I played this, but you know, either way it sounded cool. So let's play this little riff all the way through just so you can hear what it sounds like, and then we'll go to the second riff. All right, now let's learn the second riff, and we're going to be moving up here to the normal power chords. All right, so I'm going to let you hear this part of the song, and then we'll break it down. All right, so this part is pretty simple, and I'm going to play that through for you just out here in the open. But really, all we're doing is just playing some power chords. But there's some little things that I do in between, and something a little different on the second time around that you may have noticed. So what we're doing, we're playing the A minor power chord, and these are just the chords here: A minor, then an F, then a G. Then we go down here to the D power chord. And then after that, we play the F and G again. And on the second time around, I do something a little bit different. I just play a little riff, and we'll get to that part. But let me play this through all the way through for you so you can hear it just on guitar without the full mix. Now, I called out the chords already, but there's, again, some little things I do in between some of those chords. And the first thing I do, when I go from the A minor to the F, I actually hit that E string, that open E, right before I go to that F. It sounds like this. And then once I hit the F chord, I go up to the G. Then our next chord is going to be the D. Now, from that D power chord, we go back to the F, and I do the same thing there. I hit that little open E string real quick first before I go to that F chord. Now, the second time around, I do something a little different, because we never want to keep it the same all the way through every time, right? I actually play this little riff at the end of that second part there. So let you hear what this sounds like just on guitar again. So what we're doing here, and I'm going to simplify this for you. First of all, everything is on that first string, the E string, okay? And we're only playing 4 notes. I always like to break down how many notes am I going to be playing. Sometimes the riff sounds more complicated than what it is, but when you break it down to the notes in something like this, like, oh, it's not that bad, and it's really not. So what we're doing, we're playing the open string, 1st fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret, not in that particular order. It kind of flows that way, but those are the frets that we're playing. And all I'm doing is I'm hitting that open E string, coming down on the 1st fret, back to open. Now after that, I'm going to do this little slide. I'm going to pick the 3rd fret, and I'm going to slide up to the 5th fret. And once I slide up to that 5th fret, I'm going to go back to the 3rd fret, open, then 3rd fret again, and I'm going to kind of do like a wicked little bend on that thing. So this is what that sounds like. All right, for this final riff, I actually moved over here because I want to play this one through my amp. Again, I'm going to go over all the tones used in the actual song and what I use today for this lesson with you in the tone talk that we're about to get to next. So first, let's hear what this little ambient piece sounds like. All right, so this part is really simple. It is broken down into two little sections here because I do something different on the second time around. And just real quick, that's kind of my way of thinking when it comes to writing riffs. If I'm going to play something more than once, oftentimes that second part will have something a little different at the end. And to me, that keeps the song and the riffs from sounding redundant because you're giving it a little bit more spice and life and that sort of thing on that second time around there. So I will play this for you again, but first I'm going to go through these notes really quickly here because again, this is extremely simple. We start out just playing two strings, the A string, okay, your second string, and then the B string, your fifth string. The frets that we're on 3 for that A string, and then we're on frets 5, the fret number 5 on the B string. Almost like a power chord there, but you're just, that pinky finger or whatever finger you use for that is down a few strings. Just think of it that way. And then we're just moving that same position up a whole step. You're on frets 5 and then 7. And then our third round of notes there is going to be frets number 7, and then the B string is going to be the 8th fret there. Now the second half, those first two notes are going to be the same. Those first two chords, rather, are going to be the same, right? But then we're going to end on an A. And we're just playing a regular A without that little E string on there. So that's the first part. Fast forward to part number 2, the second part of this riff. We do that whole thing again, but on the final time that we play that A, we play that A, but then I move up to playing almost like a bar chord A, and I just hit those final notes there. So it's just kind of like a little subtle thing that I add the second time around on this particular riff. So let me play that through for you one more time. Alright, now it's time for just a quick dose of tone talk, okay? But first, again, that was my own song. That's track number 5 off my very first album, Apocalyptic Dreams, that I released back in 2013. The song is called Out There. You can listen to that on, YouTube Music. I want to announce YouTube Music first because that's what I'm putting this video on. And actually, I've been listening to YouTube Music more lately than iTunes, which I subscribe to iTunes. But anyway, that album's out there on all major platforms, Spotify, iTunes, all those places. Let's jump right into Tone Talk. First, for that album, I actually used a device that I no longer own, and that was the Line 6 HD 500 unit. And man, I remember first getting that unit. I was just so impressed because prior to that, I had picked up a used XT Live. I don't know if you guys remember that, the Pod XT Live, and it was a floorboard amp modeling and processing unit as well. And that was a really cool unit too. I got some really good tones out of that thing for what it was. But you know, I was kind of going back and forth. Where do I use this? And I was just starting to dabble into plugins at that time. And of course, plugins in those days, back in when I was recording this album, which was probably around 2000, between 2010 and 12, plugins were they were nowhere near where they're at today. So that was kind of out of the question. I really wasn't pleased with plugins, and there was something about the XT Live. I was like, you know, do I really want to use this? Well, then I had the opportunity to get the HD 500. I snagged that, and I'm like, man, I almost immediately just fell in love with that thing, and sometimes I still wish I had it. I actually ended up donating it to a really good cause. So I messed around with the amps and settings for probably a few months before I nailed down a tone I wanted. Because, you know, when you get something new, you're like, okay, we got to try all the settings. But I came across what's called their Angel F-Ball amp, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's modeled after the Engel Fireball. Now, anything that's modeled after Engel, I'm usually at least semi-impressed with. There's just something about the real Engel amps. When you hear that amp, it's just a very distinct tone. And it's kind of dark and scary and just, I don't know how to explain it. And that's kind of what I wanted for this album, Apocalyptic Dreams. It's kind of, you know, kind of a scary theme there if you think about it. I ended up using the Angel F-Ball, and what I did real quick, you guys know I've always, since my first album, I've always recorded 2 rhythm guitar tracks, hard panned each one. And what I did with those settings is one track had a particular mic. I used the Angel F-Ball, and I used the matching cabinet that came with it. I don't remember what other effects I used for that, but I would use a particular mic on one track, and then the other track, I just changed the mics. And what that gives you, this is kind of a recording tip, what that gives you is just a slightly different tone for the other guitar, so they don't sound exactly the same. The tones don't sound exactly the same. So that, along with actually playing those 2 tracks, you've got those little nuances, because they're not going to be perfectly played in sync. You don't want them to be way off, but you know, you're going to have slight little differences. So those differences, along with the slight difference in tone, even though I was using the same amp, really produced a nice sound. I'm still, to this day, I'm very, very much proud of that album with the tones, everything. So anyway, that's what I used for that album. Now, for this video, the guitar tones you heard by themselves, the distorted guitar tones you heard by themselves, I was actually trying to mimic that tone, so I pulled up Positive Grid. You guys know I have the Bias FX2 and Amp 2. So I pulled up Bias FX2, and I found what's called their German Fire amp. I think this is a version 2, and this, of course, is modeled after that same Engel amp, the Engel Fireball. So I'll throw that up on the screen here. I'll throw my amp settings up here. So you can see the amp settings. I'm not going to call them out. They're pretty basic. They're not much different from any other settings that I use. I'm a creature of habit. Whenever I try a new amp, I go dial in what I know my settings are. Usually I cut the bass a little. Sometimes I cut my mids a little bit. Got treble between 6 and 7. I said I wasn't going to call this out, and here I am calling out. And the gain and the presence a lot of times will depend on the amp. Those are the things that I might change the most. Most amps, I back the presence off a little bit. I cut the presence just because you start to get into that kind of fizzy sound with too much presence. I did add a little delay to the setting here, because when I recorded Apocalyptic Dreams, or this specific song, I had a little delay to that. Normally I don't use delay at all in the rhythms, but because of the way this song was structured with those higher notes, I like to have a little delay in those. And since I was really just mainly playing just power chords and holding them out with that little riff for the heavier notes, I wasn't doing enough movement that the delay would distract from that. Because sometimes if you're using delay or reverb on really fast rhythms, it's not going to sound as tight. So anyway, this song was kind of an exception for that. Last tone I used, I went to my EVH amp over here and used my clean tone for the clean part of this particular song. What I did is I just used my Boss DD7 delay pedal to get some kind of ambient effect. Of course, I didn't capture the same effect that I did with the HD 500. That thing had some amazing effects, and I think that's what I miss most about it. But I have my DD7 on, and you've got a delay modulation on this particular pedal here, so that kind of sounds pretty cool and gives you more of an ambient sound. I think the only thing I'm missing here in my live setup and pedal board is a nice reverb pedal, because if I remember correctly, the HD 500 just had some phenomenal reverbs. One was called, now I don't remember what it was called, but anyway, it was a really cool reverb that they had. Actually, I do have a blog post on the HD 500 tones. I'll put that link in the description as well. But back to the EVH, I actually did mic my EVH, so that's what you heard. You guys heard the mic'd version there. I mic'd that up with my Shure SM57, as I always do. I have such a fun time playing through a real amp and recording a live mic'd amp. I don't know, there's just something about that. But guys, anyway, I know this video is getting kind of long here, so if you've hung around this long, thank you, I appreciate it, and it's just fun to talk about these things anyway. Again, there's links in the description of this video to the HD 500 blog post. You can read about my old tones that I made for this album and other tones that I created as well. I think there's some videos, because I've got several videos on YouTube, so the videos are embedded in that blog post, so you can go through there and you can mess around. If you still have the HD 500, you can find some pretty cool patches and tones that I set up in there. And also links to my music are in the YouTube description as well. I always appreciate it when you guys support my music. Again, I had a lot of requests to teach you this specific song here, and I'm very humbled by that you guys wanted me to do that. So here it is, Out There Is Here. You can play it now. Guys, thank you so much for watching my videos. Please give this a thumbs up, and until the next video, keep it metal.